Everyone, good evening. So, I'm Dagmar. I work as a QA for books. My Twitter ID, contact information is available. The slides are already available on SlideShare. Video is being recorded. You can refer to it as well. Enough about me. Before we start off with the session, what is that? This is very weird sitting. So before we start off, I want to understand the different roles in this room. Okay. So QAs. Any QAs here? Wow. Okay. Wrong question. Who's not a QA? Excellent. What roles are there? Developer. Okay. Great. In the QAs, do you do automation and manual? Only automation, only manual?
Automation.
Both. Anyone not doing both? Okay, great. Primary language, Java, Ruby, Java. Anyone not doing Java? I'm asking the wrong questions. Okay, not Java. Good. So what we'll be doing today is looking at some aspects of what patterns mean and how they help in test automation. As part of that, we'll be looking at a lot of sample code. I say sample because this I have pulled out from various different sources which I have come across in my career, and I want to use that as reference examples to highlight certain concepts. The code itself is immaterial, what I'll be showing, but the concepts are going to be important, why I'm saying good or bad about it. Okay. For that reason, the code is in various different languages as well. It is Java, Ruby predominantly, but you might find something else also along the way. We'll see how that goes on. Again, point is that it is the concept and not really about the code. Okay? Questions at any point in time, we'll stop and we'll try to address those and get more clarifications on those as we go on. So, first thing, what is a pattern? What do you think is a pattern?
Something which is a building block or a best practice.
Building block or a best practice, they are different things. But it's definitely not a practice. It's a building block. Why is it a building block?
Because it has some inputs as well as output points which can be used in a proper manner.
That does not really make it a building block, though, right? When you think about a building block as a thought or as a concept, what does it mean? I've got a building block. I can stack one over the other and do things around that using the building blocks, right? What does it mean? Apply the knowledge of one, the structure of one, in a repeated way to achieve similar inputs.
Yes.
Right? So a pattern is nothing but a repetitive design which can be used in any form. Pattern could be something, I've got pattern on my shirt. Likewise, right? Pattern can be anything which is repeatable and applied in certain contexts. Just talking about it as a name, you immediately register what that means and in which context it can be applied. Okay? What patterns have you heard of when it comes to the software development or testing side of things? Sorry? Singleton pattern. Page object. You're saying something.
All the GUI design patterns,
Builder, visitor. There's so many patterns, right? And the minute you think about this pattern, what happens? When you have read about it or used it at any point in time, you know immediately when anyone says a builder pattern, in which context it can apply. Right? So it becomes an easy reference to how you can solve a particular type of problem. So from a test automation perspective, which are the patterns that you have heard of? So page object pattern is one of them that someone mentioned. Which other pattern can be used on the automation side? Factory pattern. In which case would you use a factory pattern?
to create page object.
To create page object, that is one way. Okay. Any other patterns?
TDD.
TDD is TDD, sorry. Yeah. So how is TDD a pattern?
Because it's particular type which we can actually devise our whole structure in.
That's a practice. TDD is a practice where you are going to write test first. The test will fail. You will write code behind it to make sure it passes. Right? TDD TDD is a practice. To write those tests and to implement the code behind it, you would still need to use patterns. You may not even think about it when you're using writing code. You might be implicitly using patterns because it just becomes such a regular way of working in many ways, right? Many cases. So which are the patterns? Singleton. Why would you use singleton in test automation?
To keep our web driver as single identity.
Okay, so that's one example. Keep the instance of the driver as a single entity across the set of tests. Okay. Any other pattern that you have heard of? Or from a test automation perspective? So pretty much each and every pattern that you apply on the development side can be applied on the testing side as well. Why? Because test automation is also code. You apply patterns on code, whether that code is to build a product or to build an automation framework which is going to test the product. It is still code. So the pattern can be any pattern that you use on the development side can be applicable over here as well. Some of them are more suited from a testing perspective, like page object pattern. You would not use a page object pattern from a development perspective. It is a way to think about it from a testing side of things. Okay, so some of the patterns that we can definitely use and think about in a proactive way is these: page object pattern, singleton pattern, composition pattern, factory, builder, and there will be many others that you would use depending on how complex your framework also is. Okay, page object, does everyone know what it is? Can someone explain what is a page object pattern?
So we create a page object out of whole address. When there is a single page, you create a single all the structural entities of that page on a single page, and then just use that page on a different image. There are multiple number of pages for a whole website, and then you can just identify that what page actually you are using. So it's much more simplified way to form that object actually. It's like if it's going for page 1, you just take the elements from the page 1. If it's going to page n, then you take the elements from page n. So it's traversing is easy.
Got it. Makes sense. Everyone understood what that is? Everyone is in sync with it? Any difference that you would think what he said or anything else you would want to add? So page object is a way to interact with whatever page or product you are interacting with, right? And we'll actually get into details of that as well. But what it essentially means, it forms a way to interact with the page under reference. Okay? It would have locators for that page, it would have ways to do actions on the page, it would have ways to get information from the page and use that to do whatever actions or validations you want to do from a testing side. Okay? Now, page object has got a lot of other details to it, and we'll look at that as we go forward. We'll also look at some other patterns today. We'll focus on a few specific ones and not necessarily on the other side of things. But again, let's not jump too much ahead of that. So the first pattern that we look at is a page object pattern. Now you mentioned that, sorry, can I have your name? Mrityunjay. So Mrityunjay mentioned if based on a page, a single page, you would have a page class would have all locators and ways to interact with that page for which it is represented, that class is represented. So let's take an example. This is an old Amazon page. I like it because it is still very less cluttered compared to what we have today. It's difficult to see so much white space in today's. But if you think about it, this is the Amazon.com homepage. And this homepage itself can be represented as one class, the homepage.java class, for example, which would have ways to interact with various different sections. Okay. Can you think about the problems this has?
This page itself has so many pages inside it.
Yes.
So when you click on say add to cart or something else, your account details. So there is a whole together another entity.
Right. So that's a very good observation that this page is a composition of different pages. But that is one part of it. Okay? And why is it just one part of it? Because it's a search. Exactly. That is another aspect. Along with dynamic as well as the static content that is there and other pages that are part of it, Other pages are actually not really seen here directly, right? There's a composition pattern. You are having ways to get to those pages. So if you think about it, the search bar, is that really a page? It has got complex functionality, right? What about the header itself? The other aspect of this, these are not individual pages, right? These are smaller components.
Divs, yeah.
Divs is the HTML way of representing, right? These are components, sections, features, really, that would be repeated across various other pages. It doesn't have anything in standing on its own, but they are complex. And if you keep thinking about it, there are so many different sections over here that you can think of. And this is just a few of those, right? Very quickly, what I could do in 2-3 minutes. There's much more complexity over here. Add to it static content, dynamic content, links to other aspects, things which do not really have any content of its own, but have serve very complex functionality. So search itself, there is a drop down, right? Or you search for specific filters, yeah. Right? So you can think about modeling when you think about your automation framework. Think about what type of product are you really building? What type of product do you want to validate? What makes sense to keep it into smaller snippets of sorts, which are logical, has business value of sorts, and you can interact in a better way with it. Why? We'll see that. So if you think about it, what really is a page object pattern? There are various different ways of creating those snippets of pages that we saw. What you really do in a page object pattern is you model your page behavior in code. And by behavior, I'm saying the interactions, right? Not business behavior. You model that. You simulate the user action. A user is going to click here. After clicking, this should happen. Then he or she will interact with that new component that comes up on that page, right? So you're simulating user actions. It helps in making a one-place change. So if something on my header bar changes, I just go to that one page, make changes, and whoever is consuming it, hopefully does not even need to think or know about it, automatically they'll be able to use this new functionality or change functionality. Hence, it reduces code duplication. I don't have my search functionality all over my framework or in all my tests. It's in very specific places that is there. And you can represent it in snippets. So, let's look at a code sample first. So what I have over here, this is a Java-based test. As I start writing my framework, right, the first thing I would not even probably think about page objects or whatever. I would just say, write a test class in this test class, instantiate the driver, open the browser, go to this URL. Okay, my basic thing is set. I know how to interact with the driver. Then you start moving things around in different places to make it modular and reusable, right? So this is that stage when you have started extracting specific functionalities of your framework into different areas of the framework. What it means now is I've got a registration page in this case, I've got a patient chart page in this case, and in my test, I'm interacting with those pages and doing assertions on those and proceed. Now, likewise, it can continue. There will be various other tests that you might have where you've got various different tests doing actions on pages, and the pages itself will be interacting with the product. Now what happens is, let's switch to a Ruby example. This is a home page for some other context, right? Over here, I've not even thought about as I'm building tests or implementing tests, I've not thought about much aspects from a practice point of view or coding style point of view. I just have a home page here and let me just write things over it. Let me just add things over it. As a result, over time, what happens? If you don't think about proper practices, the file keeps on growing and growing and growing. This file is almost 1,000 lines. Now, what happens in such cases is, I, as a tester or a developer who wants to implement or extend existing tests, I say that I need to do this. How am I going to find what I want in these 1,000 lines of code to see if something exists or not? I'm under pressure to get this done quickly. Let me take a shortcut for now. I'll come back and fix it later. Let me just start doing things in the test itself And that's why, even though I have my pages and everything, I'm starting to say, okay, find element and do actions on the page directly from here. You see the problem this is getting into, right? So if you don't think about code maintainability and reusability, you don't constantly think about refactoring, you're going to get into a stage where someone will come who doesn't have the context of the whole framework, someone new on the team maybe, and say, I need to get this done. Let me just get it. And there's no real check in place, right? Unless you do manual intervention and look at it, you code review, karo, jo bhi karo, and then you fix it at that point. But that is not solving the problem in any way. But this is one way you get started. You start off with everything in one class. So you start moving your driver instantiation separately. You start creating different page classes and your tests interacting with the page classes. In this case, also what I have is a patient information object where given a set of information, I'm creating an object of what a custom object, and I'm going to pass that object to my register. Instead of passing in 5 different parameters or 10 different parameters, I'm passing my data in a different way. Okay? So you can do various things to make it easier and reusable for that matter. So this is the first stage of evolution of creating a framework using page object pattern. But now, what does this really look like, right? If you think about it from a diagrammatic perspective, what you have is a test intent, which is your test annotation based class, JUnit test and JAnnotation. You specify the intent over there. That is where your domain functionality really comes in, right? I go to home page, I log in, I create a new patient, I register that patient, whatever that might really mean. And as part of that, I'm doing action on specific pages, I'm doing verifications, assertions on that, and I'm making sure that is following the business rules of the product. To implement that, I would have various different pages. I would have various different entities and models which represent the test data required, not really just test data, but what type of interactions I'm having with the product. That is based on some domain objects. Product is a domain object, user is a domain object. Right? And there could be various different types of these. How do you interact effectively with these? You can represent that in entities models. There will be some resources. I want to take my environment configuration from here, or my test data is coming from external files, whatever. But I have various different ways to pull that in. But essentially, this is what is going to talk to either your web driver or whatever other driver you're using. If it's a configurable framework, you might have web services, whichever way, right? You can evolve into this type of architecture. Along with that, you'll have some helpers, utilities, loggers, various other things in the framework. So this is the stage where you get your framework and you say, yes, I'm following a decent abstraction layer in my framework to make it reusable, scalable, and potentially making it just a one-place change if any change happens in the existing functionality. I know exactly where to go and do this. Okay? So if you look at this as an evolved state, you start creating many more snippets of pages, doing very specific things related with that. In some cases, as you see over here, it just has 5 elements and it just has one method. It's fine. There is no overhead of having more classes. It's not going to be a problem in that sense. But you know, if there's something browse by vehicle functionality that changes, I need to go over here and make that change. It makes it very easy and intuitive. Also, so this is based on functional area search. There could be partials. Partials could be footer or feedback or whatever else it might be there, where it has very specific. Now, in this case, there's nothing. My footer doesn't have anything. I know there's a footer, but I've not really done anything with that. So it's okay to keep it like this. It's fine. Header has many more things to be had. So now you get into more proactive way of thinking about how your pages should be. Is it based on business domain functionalities? Is it some other snippets that might be there, which would be reused across domain functionalities? And this is a constant rework that you need to keep doing. If you're starting to work on a new product and you want to do test automation along with that, which is the right thing to do, you don't really know which direction the product is going to evolve into. Yes, there is a roadmap that is there, but how often do requirements change? Every time, right? Based on that, you have to adapt. Based on that, you say, okay, this is based on this understanding, this is what I need to do. As things change, I'll come back and keep reworking that. So refactoring maintenance is a very regular thing that we need to do in framework. Okay. There are also some services and tools that might be there that you want to implement around. Okay. Any questions so far about page object? How many of you use page object pattern in your automation frameworks?
I used.
Are you currently using also? Anyone currently using other? You are. You've used and you are using. What advantages does it bring out to by using it?
Codes become manageable.
Code becomes manageable.
Fix advantage for the testing.
Okay. Anything else?
And if there are changes in the objects, then we can simply change the locators at the one class only.
Correct. That's not the same thing, right? To fix in one place or update in one place and it gets reflected across for everyone.
We can easily find out the objects whichever class it wants.
Correct.
Or whatever the modules were.
Correct.
Find out we can along with that class name.
Correct.
Distinguishing becomes
Distinguishing and identifying for that matter, right? I know if this area has got, if it's not working well, I immediately can picturize where in the framework can I find it if my structure is good enough. And there is no one right answer to say this is a good structure. It depends on the team. Main thing is everyone thinking in the same direction? That is what is important, right? So that structure is important for everyone working on the framework for them to understand what it is. Okay. Have you come across any limitations in page object data?
Like you were showing the search functionality across pages, right? So that I think that needs to be moved to some other class so that it can be reused across pages.
So that would go in the domain functionality search. It's not really a page. It's still a search page in that sense. In terms of HTML, it's a small div, whatever it might be there, right? It doesn't stand alone in isolation in any way. It's always going to be part of other functionalities. But the way you interact with it, it's still a separate page. So that's where the team again needs to decide, is it a business model or because it is shared across so many other pages, where in the page hierarchy does it sit? The team needs to think about those aspects. But that's not really a limitation, that's just a code organization perspective, how you can find it easily. What limitations might exist with the page object pattern? Every pattern has advantages and disadvantages, right? No?
there might be boilerplate.
Right?
Go to click.
In what way would there be code duplication?
Similar kind of pages will have different written the similar code.
Okay, if that is happening, that just means the practices have not been followed well. So one thing, if it was in my control on the testing side of things, or especially when doing test automation, is to disable control C, control V. No copy paste. Copy paste is where the duplication happens, right? The minute you see I need to do something similar, but not exactly the same, I cannot just copy paste it and make changes in that. You've lost the opportunity to refactor, make it a reusable thing. And there could be various variants of the same method, right? But you're using development practices to say, I'm not just going to copy paste, I'm going to refactor certain snippet out of that method into something else, which can be used in other ways as well, right? So the problem that you described is not really a problem of page object pattern. That could happen anywhere, regardless of which method, which pattern or what you're doing. So one of the biggest limitation of this is, as the framework grows, as the functionality that you are validating increases, the test intent starts getting polluted. When we talk about test automation or functional test automation for that matter, right? We are not validating granular actions. Let me rephrase, sorry. We should not be validating granular actions. It is a very expensive and a late feedback cycle if you're doing granular UI validations from your UI tests. There are JavaScript tests, unit tests, integration tests, which are better suited to do those validations. From a UI test perspective, you should be thinking about journeys or scenarios, use cases that the end user would be going through your product. It could be partial use case, it could be a complete use case. You should be thinking about automating that from a UI perspective. So the minute you start doing that, the test intent starts getting polluted. As a result, very easily, you will start duplicating that intent and implementation as well. I want to search for a book on Amazon using ISBN number. Basic search will also do. Or I want to do advanced search in books for a specific thing, giving the author ISBN number and various other parameters. Functionality is still the same. I'm implementing it in different ways. So my test intent in one case is search for a book using basic search for a book using advanced search. For that, my workflow is still the same. Go to home page, search for this, see the results. Go to home page, do advanced search for this, see the results. What is the difference? How we are doing the search. So think about it. If you have one test automated, you want to do the other. What is the typical thing you would do? Come, copy, paste, change the names, and start changing that basic to advanced search implementation, right? What have you done as part of it? You've duplicated some intent and implementation over it. It's a very basic example, but it does happen. The other thing, the intent becomes imperative. Why imperative? Because you're doing use case validation or user journey validation, where you're really validating business flows or business scenarios, right? You're not doing end-to-end validation of user actions. User action validation has got no meaning from an end-to-end perspective. Is the product able to do what it was supposed to do? That is the intent. But what happens in implementation on page object pattern is, in my test method, I'm saying I want to interact with this page and do this action on the page. I want to see if this particular information is available on the page. We are not talking about business actions at any point in time. We're talking about granular actions interacting with the pages, and as a result, again, the intent gets polluted. We'll look at some example for that. Also, this means maintenance becomes a problem, because now how I go to my home page has, or rather the search page has changed. But that's going to the search page is part of many other tests that are there. I have to go and change in each and every test. Is there an easy way to find out that? You have to get creative in terms of search or whatever else, or run the test, see where it fails, and then update, right? That's another way. In some cases, that is faster. So it becomes a challenge. As a result, again, scaling becomes a challenge. Adding tests means it's more work, more effort around that. So if you look at this aspect, again, I'm going to come back to my first test over here. Should add new patient, should add a new patient with photo. What am I doing? I have the same data over here. I'm creating this directly over here instead of parameters, others it's the same thing. I go to registration page, I register patient and verify. Over here the only difference is set photo, otherwise everything else is the same. Now, any one change required over here means I have to update two tests. Okay? Over here again, I don't know, look at this other test, right? To add new patient after checking for duplicates. I'm doing very granular actions over here, whether this is in pages or in test directly over here. I have no idea what is the business validation I'm doing out of this. What is the value I'm getting, or the product owner or the BA getting, thinking about this, my test has run, is my business value achieved? Is my requirement really met or not? Functionality works, but is my objective really met? Is my requirement really met, right? So that becomes a problem. Very imperative. Imperative means granular actions. Filling out basic info, find element by ID. Very granular action. Okay? So this is the problem which gets compounded or becomes even more of a problem as the framework grows. But just have a few tens of tests, it's fine, it's manageable. It's easy to search and get things done. But as you keep on adding more tests, if the life of the product and the automation framework is decently large, this is going to be a problem.
So
there is one registration page and there are some fields are available like name, and instead of writing an entire method to fill the registration form, so if we write one method for entering a name, and in this page is a good practice.
So in a page, enter name, enter last name,
Yeah.
those kind of things, right?
And you can just call those methods in a test case. So if there is like
That is actually a bigger problem. I'll tell you why. Why are we saying over here? So think about it this way, right? Filling out basic info. This method that we have over here, right? Filling out basic info. We are passing in 5 lines over here. Address line 1, address line 2. What is missing? Zip code, state, country, whatever else around that, right? Phone numbers. Now, if you have granular methods that you're working with, you say page dot enter this, page dot enter that. Again, you're becoming more granular for each and every action. And the minute you add or remove one parameter, think about it that I add zip code over here. Okay? Whoever is using fill out basic info now needs to enter zip code as a third parameter, otherwise it's going to cause a problem everywhere. Correct? So there are two things. If you interact directly with page, enter first name or get first name, whatever it might be. If a form is big, think about how many such actions, getters, setters that you have to implement. That's one problem. Second, even if you do methods like this, fill out basic info, give it a list of parameters. Anything more than 3 parameters in my mind is I need to use a different data structure to pass that information around. Because if I can have 3 parameters, I can easily have 4 or 5 as well in the future. Right? Let me just use a data structure, a custom object, and pass information along with that. What that does is now it becomes a responsibility of the page to say, hey, registration page, this is my object of basic information. Enter this on the page and tell me when I'm done. What that means is I am not exposing what are the different locators or specific setters, getters to the outside world. Encapsulation. Share only what you really need. I'm just saying, give me this object, I will enter the basic information, or if you want to know what has been entered, get basic information, which will return a custom object, which will have everything that you require. It makes it much more easier to manage, maintain, scale as well. One ID change, one name of the method change, you don't have to go and change 10 different files or hundreds of different files. Makes it much more easier to manage. Okay? So in my opinion, getter setters are bad. Because it again works very granular, it is exposing the inner workings of the page. Have logical methods on top of that, even if it is get me the username, which might just give you one value or a composite value, it's fine. You're encapsulating that page behavior or implementation from whoever is calling. It helps in scaling and maintenance. Okay? So for these problems, or rather for these reasons, page object pattern eventually starts showing signs of fatigue of sorts, right? But it starts preventing you keeping your code dry, reusable, clean. It prevents doing that. So what is the next thing that you can do to prevent those things happening? And that is where the business layer page object pattern comes into question. This is known probably by any other pattern. I think people call it flow-based pattern or whatever it might be. The name is immaterial. This is something that I started calling it a good few years ago because that's what made sense. This is where my business layer is going to be. What it means is our architecture has now evolved slightly. My test intent, which earlier had the domain functionality, actions, verifications, and rules, has changed. My test intent is now going to talk only about my business operations, what I want to do. Think about a good example, flight booking. What is my test intent? I should be able to book a flight. I should be able to search for a flight, select one of the flight options, provide passenger information, provide payment information, and book the ticket. That is my business operation. 5 steps, 5 methods in the test intent. Saying this is what I want to do. This is what my intent is. This is what I want to do. Looking at that test intent, 5 crisp lines, well-named methods, you know exactly what is happening as part of that test. What these methods are business layer or domain functionality. Search for flight. On what basis do I want to search? Select from the flight options. On what basis? Business rules, right? Of course, there will be some input parameters saying what type of flight I want to search, which option do I want to select. Those that test data information will have to be provided, but the rest is all hidden off from the intent perspective because intent does not care. What you want to know is your test failing if any of those things goes wrong. It doesn't matter if my assertion is here, or anywhere else. The test has to fail for a good reason. And it has to tell me if anything goes wrong. When you write tests, you look at the reports out of it. You look at the reports, you want to know exactly what this test was doing. That's why it's very important to keep it clean. So you have business layer, where business layer will say, okay, search. Search actually means I have to first go to search page. I have to enter all the search criteria, and then I get the results. Okay, that is fine. Select from search results page. Now that could be various different ways of implementing. For example, JetHabiz has got a very different way of showing search results compared to Indigo or MakeMyTrip or whatever else aggregation sites as well. So they are showing in various different ways. What do you really want to do? How do you want to implement that search results and validate if you see the correct set of data? Those kind of things. Certain operations might be complex operations, right? What would be a good example of a complex operation? So it's a complex business rule which says, let's take a banking example. I want to create a customer with dependents. Okay, that is one of the things. Now, create customer itself has got a lot of different components from a banking perspective. Personal information, financial information, various other things, which have various different pages. Also, dependents come as part of this. Add dependents, what does it really mean? So there's certain aspect of business logic involved in this. To say if I have to create dependents as well, I need to call another business operation to validate can I have dependents on. But actual creation is individual snippets of pages that I'm going to work with. So business operations can be complex operations, which can call other business operations, or it can call pages, entities as well. The implementation of that business operation, search or whatever that operation is, and the validation if it is done correctly or not, is the responsibility of the business layer. I don't want to say in my intent, search, confirm search has been worked correctly, or assert search is correct. I don't want to do that. It is polluting my intent. When I say search, select book, that's what should happen. Anything fails, it has to tell me. Okay? So no assertions in test intent. In my test method, I say no assertions, not required. Let the business methods, business layer take care of that. The rest of the things remain the same. Okay? Now what happens as part of this, why this becomes powerful, think about the earlier example where you had create patient and create patient with photo. These are business operations. My test intent could just have been create patient with photo. Over here in the business functionality, there are two methods, create patient with photo, because it's been called in that fashion. But internally, this is classic Java code. I can extract it, parameterize it, do whatever to keep that implementation the same. In the first case, create register patient without photo. I'm just setting photo parameter as null or empty, whatever. In the other case, I passed in a value which is going to say, oh, wait a minute, I have to add a photo as well to this. What it means, implementation is one. With coding practices, I've made sure I'm not duplicating that implementation. As the framework grows, it becomes much more easier. You want to add more details during registration, do more refactoring on that method in the business operations. The test is going to call business operations, which will do that orchestration and get the implementation done. Okay? So how would this potentially look like? So very simple example. In this case, it's a Cucumber JVM example, a BDD tool example given when then format. This is not really a very declarative kind of example, but What it's saying is, given I am on the search page, I search for the content, I see a list of related posts. Which are the related posts? I'm passing that information over here. It is available from me. I don't care which page I'm talking to. I don't care how that implementation is done. I don't really care about the assertions if I am searching for the correct content or not, or what are the details around it. And let the framework take care of those aspects. Now, what this would do is, in my framework, this talks to business layer method. It is not talking to pages, it is now talking to business layer method, which will have, okay, search for related posts, and this is going to do the orchestration with the pages around. This can do assertions as well. Rather, this is where assertions should happen. Pages should never do assertions. Should have mentioned that. Page objects are dummy objects. They just know how to set information and how to get information. They have no concept of what is right or wrong. Classic example, login, 2 parameters, username, password. Does a page object know it should be failing a successful login or not? Is whoever is calling that page object knows I'm passing it correct credentials or not, and what do I expect out of it? The page object is just doing that. Okay, so business layer is going to call the page object to say this is a successful login, and is it really successful or not? Okay. So with this aspect of introducing one layer in the as a business layer above the pages, you are now able to specify your business operations over there. And because it is classic code, it is not in a test intent that you can share or call methods on the test files itself. It becomes very valuable. So one might argue that, okay, I've got test classes, I can have private methods over there in the pages which can be called by other cases. It's fine as long as it's in the same class. Then you might say, okay, no, I can put it into the same package in another class and use it. That's exactly what we are doing by business layer, which is now available as a business domain object and not just associated with the test itself. Okay, just proper abstraction layers is what it comes down to. Questions, thoughts? Do we understand the business layer? What value it brings out? You'll be able to use it directly from tomorrow, right? Implement this. So the advantages are now you start validating what is important to the business. All the other types of tests, you focus on a technical side of it. There should be at least some tests which are validating what the actual business requirement was, why you are building that feature, functionality, or the product for that matter. End-to-end validation is what a UI test should be doing from that perspective. This helps in that. The test pyramid remains same. Do we know about the test pyramid? Yeah. So test pyramid by definition is a triangle. Top end is where the UI tests sit. What does that mean? Minimum number of tests. Lower of the end of the pyramid, maximum number of the tests, that is unit tests. Why is UI test the minimum? Because it takes the whole product to be built and deployed, and then the test will run against it. Plus, it is very slow. You have to start the driver, open the browser, do various actions around it, and of course, weights and everything to ensure there are no random failures related to time and everything. So, it is very slow. It's very expensive in terms of getting feedback. I've done my change. It's taking a long time to get a build ready and deployed in some environment before which I can run the test. So that's why reducing the number of tests on the top is very helpful. What the test pyramid doesn't say very easily or clearly, the impact of each type of test. Unit test, we know by definition, is testing granular methods, right? Inside classes. Integration test is going across modules or components. UI test is covering the breadth of the product. So the pyramid is like this, automation pyramid is like this, but the impact of each test is really the other way around. Unit test is granular, UI test is breadth of the product. Okay, that's very important. By taking this approach of thinking about business functionality in UI test, you're helping thinking about the breadth of the product, how it's all coming together, and it helps you. Abstraction of layers allows separation of concerns. Page object was also doing that. This does it even more. Changes are isolated. Now think about it when any technical details change, right? If it is changing from radio button to checkbox, I go to my specific page, make the change, everyone is happy. If there's a business logic change, I'll go to my business layer. Even my pages are still the same, it's just the way the workflow is changing. I just have to change that. But I know exactly what is happening over there. If both of them are changing, result of business functionality, UI is also changing. I know the implementation of the business logic, I'll go in business layer. Specific interactions, I'll go to the page and make the change. It again remains isolated in that sense. And hence, maintenance and scaling becomes relatively easier. I'm saying easier, not a hard claim. It still comes down to the team implementing it, how well they do it or not. In some cases, it is just extremely complex. Okay. Quickly, we'll think about test data as well. Why do we need to think different about test data? Do we need to think differently about test data? Sorry?
How do you reuse the test data?
How do you reuse the test data? That is one criteria for using having test data. Reusability.
Multiple sets.
Multiple sets, yes.
Independent test data.
It has to be independent as well.
Maybe unique.
Unique, correct. Which ties down to independent as well as reusable.
Comprehensive.
In what way?
The data covering all the specific scenarios of the content.
Is it satisfying the intent that you want to validate, correct?
All the intents are
That's subjective again. Do you really want to do that from UI perspective or not? Right? Do I want to check my 10 field combination from the UI? That's 10 power 10. Or would you rather take 3-4 scenarios from there and move the rest to unit test level, which will be way faster, right? But inherently data is complex. It's not just about specifying username, password. It could be, I want to search for a book, which might be a name of the book, author name, ISBN, whatever else around that. That is still easy. I want to search for a phone. Okay, make, model, operating system, screen size. The list of parameters is huge. Still not as, sorry? Still not as complex as thinking about an individual customer from a bank. Personal information, financial information, resident from an Indian context, current address, present address, residential address, what are other types of addresses you have, work address. Dependents would have the same set of things again around that as well, right? Data is complex. From a testing perspective, you need to ensure that the data mimics real data. If I keep working just with the stub data or mock data, what is going to happen in production or when we go live? First occurrence of real data, we might find out obvious things that we have missed out. Why? Because there's a limitation how much you can do at unit test level. So from a functional level, you have to complement those efforts and say, fine, we have worked with stub data or mock data. From a UI perspective, end-to-end perspective, how can I ensure it's realistic data which is flowing across correctly? And how do you model that data is very interesting, right? Because it needs to be unique. Why unique? Because I cannot create 2 Anand Bagmars as a bank customer. It is not possible. That's a business rule violation. However, I can search for the same book n number of times, which is fine. Depends on the context what you are trying to validate. Data can be nested. We spoke about customer individual having dependents, which has the same set of information. How do you do that? Those specified as static needs to be dynamic. Why? For that unique constraint. In my test data, I cannot say create customer Anand and expect the test to pass all the time. Why? Because first time it runs, it has been created. Now what am I going to do? Well, either I delete it, that customer first and then recreate. But in the banking system, they never delete customers. They're archived or they're marked as whatever the status might be, but they're never deleted for audit purposes or whatever is required around that. So how do we do that? So now your framework needs to say, if I have to create a customer named Nanan, dynamically I'm going to add a prefix, suffix, whatever it takes to make that name unique and then create. So any number of times I run it, I'll be able to create that customer. You need to think about all this. Data can be shared and reused. Now, I think you mentioned, right, it has to be independent for each test. Yes, but I cannot be creating a new customer for every time, potentially, right? For various reasons. Why? Because maybe my list of customers is coming from a mainframe or from some other system where I cannot just keep on creating. I've got a bank of customers, or maybe I've done a DB refresh from prod where I've got a set of customers which I need to reuse. So how can it be done? Having intelligent queries on top of the database to say, give me a customer of this type, and use that customer in my test. And the minute that query returns empty, that means it's time for a new refresh again. So there are various different ways you can be creative about this to proceed. Any other criteria or thoughts you have come across in your careers for test data?
I'm saying instead of having complete copy of production data, how about creating the test data that you need for the test within that data, hampering the state of the database?
Absolutely. That is one step before I would do real testing from UI perspective. Right? Because there are various things that happen working with real data. It's not just the quality of data. So I could say, okay, I've taken one row dump from the database for the customer. I'm going to create that, delete that in my test environment. Works great, perfect. It's flowing through end to end. But what about creating a customer actually going through various different systems in the real system with the volume of data that they have? Maybe it times out, you would never know. Maybe it returns duplicate results or whatever might happen, right? Or maybe it returns incorrect results when you're doing a search for that. There could be so many things that go wrong when working with volume of data, which is not just from a functional perspective. So you are right, that will help speed things up a lot. It also means you have access to the database to do those types of changes for that matter, right? It's a great luxury to have. You should leverage it. But that cannot be the only thing. The value of working with realistic data, volume of data, as real as possible, is tremendous. At least some form of sanity should be done on that as well, if not everything.
Maybe like the performance test that we run it on the populated data, which is test. So those tests are covered as part of the performance test.
Depends. And again, reason I'm saying depends, in some cases yes, because the nature of performance tests might be actually going through systems and going through a flow to say, yes, this is a performance of my whole workflow. If you're measuring performance of a specific transaction or a specific type of API, it's not really going to do that. So what it comes down to is understanding your product, your context, and seeing, have I covered all aspects of testing in that, complementing each other, which means I need to know what is happening in unit tests, I need to know what is happening in integration tests, what is happening in web service tests, what is happening in UI tests, what's happening in performance tests, and now all my intent that I have thought of is covered in one of these, I'm good. If it's not, you need to figure out where it best fits in that pyramid and says, this is where I need to implement it. So each product context will determine whether that is sufficient or not. I would not go with the assumption of just doing that is sufficient, because you start becoming complicit then. If you don't ask that question, you will not get a realistic answer for that in each specific case. Now, data itself can be specified in various different ways. You can specify it in test implementation. We saw in some example, right? In the test itself, we've got first name, last name, whatever we specify that. Sorry, that is implementation. Implementation is inside the page itself. I know I'm always going to log in with the same user. The username, password is hard-coded over there. It can be in the test specification or intent. These are the examples that we saw. In the test annotation, we've got first name, last name, what are information over there. It can be in code, but in separate data structures. It can be enums or static arrays or different class files, wherever, for whatever reason, right? That is a different form, which is external files. Okay? External files can be Excel, CSV, various other places. So Excel by far is one of the most popular, but what it means is you need to have Microsoft licenses as well to work with it. Also means you're restricted to the Windows environment, which might also work in many cases, right? CSV is another popular example. You export that Excel into a CSV and use that, it becomes more portable in that sense. Less readable but more portable and lightweight also. You can have property files, you can have XML files, hopefully not anymore, but that is a possibility. YAML, much more simplified version of XML. You can have your own test database where you specify whether it's a dump of production or a specific set of database where you are creating, seeding your own data and using that. Okay? JSON is another very popular way of using. Config files might be another way of using this. And some of these files are, depending on the implementation language, you just require that file and you can access attributes or elements from that file directly in code. You don't need to write separate readers for it. The CSV file, you have to read it, get it into some object, and then work with it. JSON, YAML, you can directly start working with those depending on the language you're using. Okay. Just quickly want to share one example of how I have specified test data in the case. Again, coming back over here, what I'm saying is I want to create a individual customer. The type of customer is an individual customer. Now in this case, I know the data is really huge required to create a customer, but the data is not really adding any value in my test specification. What value am I going to see by putting Anand, Bagmat, Pune, whatever else over here? Okay? It's just making the intent polluted. It's adding garbage to that test intent. I don't know what really is going on. So what I've done over here is, instead of specifying that data, I'm just saying what type of information I want for this. I want contact info of type individual one, address to be of type BNERES. What it means is, I've got, in this case, two JSON files over here as entities. And I'm saying contact info individual one. So I go to contact info, I'm going to pick up the data specified in as individual one, and I'm going to use that. Likewise, for address, I said BNERES3, I'm going to go to that particular file, I'm going to pick up that address and use it. I don't need to provide that complex data over there itself. Now what it means is, it becomes very easily reusable by other tests as well. Challenge comes, if I need to change that, it might affect any other test. So again, communication in the team, practices on the team, how you collaborate and work on this is important. I'm not just going to change the data, existing data to something else, run my test passed, I'm done. What about the test that might have failed because of the change? This comes down to responsibility on the team. Okay, so think about how you use it. Now, there might be other aspects that we spoke about, right? That I cannot create the same customer every time. I need to make it unique. So what I've done in this case is I added a new column over here in my data to say randomize. And randomize based on the types, or in this case, it's either going to be true or false. If it is true, what I have done is in the implementation, when I load this JSON object, I say, oh, this is randomized. It is of type contact information. My framework implementation knows in my contact information what aspects I need to randomize. Maybe it's a zip code, maybe it's a phone number, maybe it's an email address, whatever. It's my implementation based on context of my product, what I want to randomize for this type of entity. Likewise for address or name, whatever it might be. Right? If I say randomize, it might be one field, it might be randomized all, does not matter. But just by specifying a small flag, true, false, I'm able to say for this type of entity, randomize it. Why is this important? I might say I create a new individual customer, contact info randomize or rather false, and I expect this to fail because this is an existing customer. That's a valid test. I don't want to just randomize by default every time. The intent has to drive what is to be done. Okay? So you can make your framework as intelligent as you want based on the need of the team and need of the testing. Okay? So what criteria will you use for test frameworks? Some common things are it has to be easy to specify. Only if it is easy to specify, it will be easy to read and consume by everyone else, including the framework as well. You need to probably provide ability to override the specified data to make it dynamic. That is an important aspect. It of course has to be usable. I cannot have a CSV file with 100 parameters in that row and expect it to be used easily. It's not going to be possible. In that case, CSV is not the right format if it needs to be updated. Think about some other format which will help you. Okay? Some tips over here, have a consistent way. Consistent way could be maybe Excel it is, fine. But think about if it is not working well, evolve it, be free to change it for everyone's benefit so that it will become easier from testing perspective and automation perspective. Treat the data as business entities. Now, if I want to search for a book, have the entity specified, the book entity specified in the format which is represented as a product in the as a book product in your product itself, in Amazon itself, for example. Title, author, publisher. Don't give some weird names instead of title, say book name. It's not going to help. It's not going to be correlatable to what is really happening. Okay? If you use the same entities as what the product itself is using, it will be easy to map what is going on with the data.
So it's just the consistency between developer and
Absolutely. It's not just developer and this, right? It is consistency between what the business requires, what you're providing as a feature, as well as how the implementation has happened and how you're testing for it. It's all putting it in sync. Okay? So in the Ruby world, at least you can use active records, right? You just directly connect to the database for that table, and you're able to use the same model object as is in the database. It becomes very powerful, and using the factory pattern or builder patterns on top of that, you can very easily create data in the same way as a product is doing. Extremely powerful. In this case, we are saying think about what that model represents, what that entity represents, and specify data in that same. Okay. Override as appropriate, and create some DSLs to give meaningful information. Get me individual contact information. Get me the address from this blob of data. It will make it easier to look at your test and say, oh, this is what is really happening in the implementation. Makes it very easy. Okay? And use that DSL in the test implementation. Think about if the data is really complex and you need to work a lot with that test data. I want to create a copy of this certain thing. Have methods like build or copy, or is this object equal to the other object? The data object equal to the other data object, right? Why will it be helpful? I say I've created an individual customer having individual 1 and address 2. I want to compare with what has actually been created. I get the data as the same model object, entity object, and I just say, are these objects equal? So writing some equals method on top of that will make it much more easier to compare and say, oh, this one field was different. You know exactly what is what. Okay. So keeping time in consideration, why do we want to use patterns? They are well known, well understood. They are tried and tested solutions for common problems. Does not mean it is going to solve your problem. So be watchful about, is it really going to help you or not. It reduces complexity because it's a repeatable way of implementing it. They are language neutral. We spoke about page, object, and so many patterns without saying is it Java or Ruby or whatever else, right? It's language neutral. It's relatable to everyone. It aids in the communication aspect. Okay? Also helps in creating that single ownership, single point of change. It saves time and effort eventually. Building the framework in the correct abstraction layer with the correct patterns takes time. Once it is done, it becomes really easy to keep going forward with it. Helps in maintenance, debugging, and scaling as well. And it also helps get your test automation code closer towards production quality. Because now you're thinking the same lines as the developers would be thinking when building products. Okay? Last bit, which is the best pattern to use? Exactly. It depends. It depends on the context, and the context is huge. Depends on the context of the product, tech stack of the product, who's working on that code base, what is their expertise, what's the vision of the product, is this going to be a handover? So in a product organization, it's not really handover. In services organizations, okay, I'm working on a client project, I need to hand it over to the client at some point in time. You have to think about so many different aspects, and that is what will help you determine what makes sense to build or not.
Also, the kind of implementation you have provided, or the kind of approach you are using.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Okay. So there are some references also over here to certain information about page objects. and what you should think about when building these frameworks. Okay. With that, I've come to the end of the content. Sorry, we ran overboard by 5 minutes, but it was, I think, good interaction across. Just one thing I like to say when I talk about test automation or building automation framework, right? You need to have a vision. A product, when you build a product, you have a vision. What is this product really going to do? For whom is it going to solve problems? That vision, right? Test automation framework also need to have a vision of what is required. So think about it as you want to build a bridge across a valley or across a river. What are the set of things that you would get as requirements? I want to build a bridge, and because whoever is sponsoring the bridge, they say, okay, I would like to get maybe a suspension bridge or whatever type of bridge, right? These are the some requirements that come in. Based on that, what happens? You start thinking about, okay, this is what needs to be done. What's the first thing you do? You start designing directly? No, you go understand the topography, see how the sand is or soil is over there, how hard rocks are there or not. Wind flows could be important, various aspects, right? Once you've studied it well, you create a plan. Based on the plan, I know in the end I need to color it in certain whatever colors I want to use. You start by ordering the colors. You start really by the foundation of it, right? For the pillars, whatever is required. So if you have the long-term vision, you start with the foundation, just keep on evolving on top of that. Automation framework is also like that. Think about what is the vision of this framework, what problem it is going to solve, and don't solve it all together. Prioritize things, work on the basics, and keep evolving to get to that stage. That is very important. Evolution and refactoring are the key in building a good automation framework. Okay? I'm done.